front make a preface saying that one of the joys of being able to deliver a homily at the Spirit of the Wilderness is to be able to share and listen to many different voices. And I will strive to be non-political. It's a touchy topic these days. And I want to share a very personal and sometimes anecdotal story of Syrians, refugees, and our other Episcopal church, as well as a few related items. Some may see this a little differently, and in this congregation, it's perfectly okay. So all three of the readings, as I understand them, relate to the topic at hand. From Nehemiah, go your way, eat the fat and drink sweet wine, but send portions of them to those for whom nothing is prepared. Share. Corinthians, for in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. The members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect. That there be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. And finally from Luke, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight of the blind, and to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now there's an interesting ongoing debate, which seems silly to me, in the media about whether Mary and Joseph were refugees and how we should or how we would react today. But I'm not going there. Somebody said this is my PowerPoint presentation. I suppose it's sort of a manual PowerPoint presentation. Let me give you a little background. Christ Church, Detroit, which I've been a member for 40 years, Patsy for almost 30, is also known as Old Christ Church, Detroit. It's the oldest Protestant church in the state of Michigan, which is still located on its original site. It was designated a Michigan State Historic Site in 1970 and a National Historic Landmark in 1971. Christ Church, Detroit was founded by a group of Episcopalians in 1845 who decided that St. Paul's Church, which is now the Cathedral Church in the Diocese of Michigan, was just too crowded. The founders built a small wooden church, which isn't too much bigger than this one, as its first place of worship. And at that time, it was on the fringe of Detroit. 15 years later, plans were made for a new building on the same site. In 1860, a chapel was constructed near the original structure, and simultaneously, a very Gothic, very ornate building was constructed simultaneously. The architect was Gordon Lloyd, who was very famous for church architecture throughout the country. And it was completed in 1863, and a few years later, those two buildings, the chapel and the main part of the church, were combined into a single building. The building is exquisite, Gothic, we have 2 Tiffany windows, stunning architecture, and for the last 40 years, it's been known for its outreach, and it's been known for its incomparable music program and good ministry and good preaching. It's always in need of repairs and of money. Christ Church Detroit has always been a progressive church that strives to be a beacon of hope to the city of Detroit and beyond. It is the one of the few surviving churches in the whole city of Detroit. I think there's 4 right now. During our own tenure, the first woman priest in the state of Michigan was installed as an assistant priest. The first gay couple was married actually by Irv Brown, who was rector for 14 years and is a member of this parish. As I said, he served for 14 years. Let's talk about the Syrian connection and Christ Church Detroit, maybe how it relates to the readings today and maybe even to us. 102 years ago, there there was an influx of Syrians to the United States, especially to New York City, Chicago, and to Detroit. And it was primarily because of the hostilities of World War I, 1914 to 1918. And Syria at that point wasn't the Syria we know now. It was actually a much larger that encompassed Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Upper Palestine. It was a very large area, and it was divided up after the First World War. There were today, like today, sometimes vicious hostilities against immigrants from Middle Eastern countries, and it seemed especially to Syrians. At that point, 102 years ago, Christ Church Detroit was already an old parish. It was 60 years old, having been through the Civil War and now having sent many off to World War I, many who never returned. It was situated, as I said, at the edge of downtown, and it was on a street, Jefferson Avenue, that was lined with beautiful trees and lovely mansions, and it was a very idyllic community. The newly arrived Syrians were shunned, and even though they were Christians, they could not find a welcoming home. The Catholic Church rejected them. And the leadership at the church at that time said, let's think about that. And they adopted a large number of families. My recollection is at least 20 families were adopted by Christ Church Detroit at that time. And all from the city of Homs, which is in the present Syria. There's a picture there of it right now, which is pretty frightening. They were impoverished, frightened, hungry, and a long way from their ancestral home. So what did Christ Church do? They provided a place of worship. Originally, it wasn't equal. They had their own service downstairs, and then the Episcopalians had their service upstairs. But of course, that changed. There was a lovely building behind the church, which was called the Parish House, and that was rededicated to the needs of that community primarily. The church hired a full-time nurse and tutors to work with the youth of the parish and to help them assimilate into the community and to be part of it. They provided extensive medical and dental care. One of the mans, Fred Montney, who Patsy and I know, had years of surgery because of a spine that was curved very badly when he was a youth. And he's now in his 90s, and he talks about it to this day. It worked actively to secure education and job opportunities for the Syrians. It built a gymnasium known as Ledger Hall, and it provided an opportunity to form girls and boys basketball teams that some of the older Syrians still talk about. Later on, it turns out, as an aside, Joe Lewis practiced in that same gymnasium. And as you might imagine, the church was roundly criticized for this activity and stance that they took. This was just too much. So let's move forward. By the 1950s, the fortunes of East Jefferson Avenue had changed. It became a very industrial area. The houses were torn down, they were vacant, it was dirty, impoverished. The church buildings were in poor repair, and the Sunday attendance dropped, in fact, to pretty small levels. During the course of that, this would be like almost 100 years at that point, several daughter churches had started out as missions of Christ Church Detroit. The two notable ones are Christ Church Cranbrook and Christ Church Grosse Pointe, who remain among the more wealthy parishes in the United States today. But Christ Church had a significant endowment that had been put in place to sustain the future of the parish. And Christ Church Grosse Pointe attempted to leverage a shutdown of the downtown parish. It was a terrible neighborhood, people weren't going anymore, you can just see the arguments. But what they really wanted is the money and the rector. And it almost succeeded. But surprise, the leadership was primarily Syrian at that point. And that group, and a few that hung on, that I got to know, led by the Reverend William B. Sperry, fought this entirely and frontally, and ultimately were very successful. So Syrians saved Christ Church. Would be probably gone at this point. The Syrian community now probably constitutes 30% of the parish, and the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continue to worship and have a significant role in the presence of the parish. They're fiercely loyal to and greatly enrich the parish to this day. Family names include Mashurs, Dibbs, Costandis, Sullivans, Motneys, Abdullahs, Moses, Essie, etc. They have an event every 2 years. It started in the 70s called a hafli. And a hafli, if you've ever been to one, is a crazy Syrian dinner dance, which is just a lot of fun. And they raise $20,000, $25,000 off of a hafli. And just to give you an idea of the flavor, originally we had a relationship with Christ Church Nazareth, an Episcopal church in Nazareth, who started a school for Arabic children. And we supported that actively for many, many years. And that's holding its own right now. So more recently, the funds have been used for sending the youth group to a pilgrimage to places like Greece and Scotland, etc. But it's been an important part of the ministry. So how does that relate? I could take 50 members of the parish that I know, but I've just chosen, I guess, 2 to show you that investment 100 years ago, how that can lead to important and wonderful things. The first is Rachel Bassey, who is here with her dog. And Rachel is the granddaughter of Alex and Josephine Mashur. Alex and Josephine were really the patriarch and matriarch of the parish, and Josephine continues to do that. Alex is gone now. She's in her 30s, was a stalwart youth group member with my son, who she took to high school prom. She did her undergraduate education at NYU in English and American literature. She's kind of a jet setter. She lives in Spain, married to a really great Spaniard. She just completed her PhD a couple of weeks ago at the University of Spain in Madrid. She's a very talented musician, and my understanding is that she is accepting a faculty position and moving back to the States for a while. Very typical of the Syrian community. The next one is Sarah Galley with the great big smile and her, I think, fiance, also a granddaughter of the Mashur family. She's an undergraduate degree from Kalamazoo College, where, in one of the smallest world things I know of, she served as a peer minister working with Mary Ellen Ashcroft, and was very, very effective on that. Today she lives in Washington, D.C., and she works for the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in a leadership role as a sales associate. She's a skilled violinist and plays in numerous chamber groups, and is just an amazing young woman. These 2 anecdotal examples are from many, many of the generation who continue to proclaim their heritage and offer gratitude to Christ Church Detroit and for their leadership. They're very professional. There's a huge premium on education. Among the group are countless architects, business folk, physicians, contractors, musicians, etc., etc. Another friend, Richard Abdullah, was the son of the first Syrian member of the vestry and the first Syrian warden at Christ Church Detroit. He and I were friends for many, many, many years, and he and I did almost everything on buildings and grounds on that parish for decades. He just an amazing guy. But he told me, this was a little prophetic, about 25 years ago, that he was frightened that hostilities would eventually arise and that his name would ultimately become a liability for his family and his sons. And I told him I just didn't see it, but I think I was really, to an extent, wrong there. Let me shift gears for just a minute. As you know, I was on the faculty at Wayne State University for almost 40 years. Wayne State University is 35,000 students. We're located right in downtown Detroit. It's a very big campus, and approximately 20% of the students are Arab Americans at Wayne State University. that's much higher in the sciences and math areas in particular. In the classes that I would teach at both the graduate level and the undergraduate level, it wasn't unusual to have 30–40% of the students to be of Arabic American descent, from all kinds of religions and backgrounds, but with a kind of a common underlying theme of being very passionate about taking their studies seriously. A good number of them, I would say 50, 60, 70% of them were probably first generation college students, and they really worked hard and they really got pushed at home to be able to do that. Well, why is that? Dearborn, Michigan, which some of you know, is right next door. It's the home of the Ford Motor Company. It's the home of the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village. And it's also now the largest enclave of Middle Eastern immigrants in the United States, and perhaps in the world. Population is 100,000 roughly, and almost 50% are Arab American. They're of all faiths and religions, and Patsy and I enjoy restaurants and nightlife and a great many friends there. And Sarah and Kyle aren't here today, but I know they do the same thing when they're back in Michigan. Another colleague at Wayne State University, Bashar Sabati. Now, when I started there, his name was Mohammed, and he actually worked for me in the institute, research institute that I ran for many, many years, and he was in charge of all NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. It's for looking at molecules in a very delicate and a structural kind of way. And about 15, 18 years ago, he changed his name from Mohammed to Bashar Sabati, because he was so concerned about the name and the implication that it would have and the negative connotation that it might have on him and his children. He has two sons that are cum laude graduates of the University of Michigan, and the daughter, I think, who starts there in the fall. He brings the most amazing Middle Eastern food when the staff would get together. He has a small prayer rug, and every day at a certain time he closes the door, and puts his rug down, and says his prayers, and it's very respectful. Let's go back to Christ Church Detroit, and then I'll finish this up. This is from the newsletter for the last few weeks. Because of our unique history here at Christ Church, the plight of the Syrian refugees feels particularly personal and pressing to our church family. Our outreach committee continues against odds in its efforts to sponsor a Syrian family. Josephine Powell, a good friend of ours, is our contact person for this initiative. Please continue to keep the Syrian people, especially those in the war-torn region around Homs, and there's a picture of present-day Homs, in your prayers. Now, in 2014, the Governor Snyder, you may have heard about recently in the press, called for Michigan to invite up to 50,000 refugees from Syria and related countries to repatriate into the United States, and in particular Detroit, to help fill this vast voids of empty neighborhoods and places to live, and there's lots of jobs for people that are willing to work hard for it. So far, I think of 50,000, I think they brought in a dozen. And it's just gone to a complete, utter standstill. There was a conference at the University of Minnesota a few weeks ago, and Eric Schwartz, the dean of the Humphrey School at the University of Minnesota, said, it's difficult, really, to divorce politics from the refugee debate. Humanitarian crises don't necessarily have humanitarian solutions. They have solutions in the realm of politics, diplomacy, and security. But I would add, within the church and among people of goodwill. It's curious that in the last 2 months, our Canadian friends to the north have invited more Syrian refugees' families than the United States has in the last 5 years. So let me conclude by a reminder of thinking of the words of Luke, and just saying that I don't know if Grand Marais will ever see any Syrian or other refugees in the present time, but if we do, or if in some small way we can help make that happen, I would certainly hope that the spirit of the wilderness would figure out how to be like Christ Church Detroit was in 1914. And I suspect that we probably would be. And we would be blessed with all the Sarahs and the Rachels and their kin for generations to come.